Okie doke. Thank you everyone for joining for Decoding Dyslexia Idaho's Wednesday webinars. Tonight is the Science of Reading with Dr. Sally Brown. I will introduce Sally real quick. Dr. Brown is currently an assistant professor at the Department of Education at the College of Idaho. She has dedicated her career to incorporating effective instructional practices to meet the needs of diverse learners. With approximately 8 years of experience as a classroom teacher working with at-promise students and 10 years of experience training teachers, Dr. Brown uses the knowledge she gained in the classroom to guide her research and teacher training courses. She received a master's degree of education in special education from the University of Virginia and has her doctorate degree specializing in curriculum and instruction with a literacy concentration through the Utah State University. And Dr. Brown is also a dear friend of mine who sits with me at the SEEP panel at the State Department of Education. And she's also a mama of a son who is dyslexic. So near and dear to my heart, Dr. Brown, thanks for taking time to be with us tonight. I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Thank you so much, Robin. I'm really happy to be here because I have a lot of passion for this topic and for getting our teachers prepped and up to speed on what best practices to use with our students with dyslexia and other struggling readers and writers. So Robin has created a poll for me. So she's going to share our poll questions. So a couple of questions to give me a better sense of who we have with us and kind of your interest in the topic, etc. I think you're muted, Robin. Can't hear you.
It says I'm sharing it. Do you see it?
I don't see it yet, no. And we just did it and it worked perfectly. So we're confident it's going to work.
It's going to work. Hang tight. It's asking me to share results. Maybe
there we go. We see it now. So first off, the first question, why are you interested in dyslexia and the science of reading? So you have 4 choices there. Go ahead and select your choice. Oh, it looks like poll results. I can't select my choice.
It's the results. I can't click on an option.
Oh my gosh. Let's try this one.
I think it's because you already tried it.
That's what I was wondering. Can you not redo a poll?
You should be able to, I think.
You know, you could show us those results and then
we relaunch poll. It's asking me to relaunch. Let's try this.
There we go.
There we go. That's it. Looks like when you have about 15 responses, Robin, feel free to share the results of the poll.
Okay.
And thank you for having your camera on. I love seeing people. Feels like, you know, an actual in-person-ish kind of discussion and presentation.
It does. It feels, you know, we're all getting used to this Zoom business, but I miss face-to-face.
Yes, so do I. So do I.
Okay. I think 85% have participated. Should I end the poll?
Yes, go ahead. We'll take a look.
And share results?
Yes.
Here we go.
All right. So lots of teachers, it looks like. I'm a teacher and have many students struggling with reading. Few parents that their child has been diagnosed with dyslexia or show signs of dyslexia, and then a few administrators, district employee, or state leader interested in improving instruction. Awesome. Then how would you rate your knowledge of reading and writing instruction? So looks like the largest percentage is I know quite a bit about evidence-based instruction and work to apply it as I can. A little bit of depth of knowledge and zero, no, basically nothing. So please feel free as we're going throughout our discussion and presentation to put your questions and in your comments in the chat, and we'll address those as we go. I'm happy to do that. And then we can also address questions at the end. So if you want to go more in depth on some of the things I present, feel free to note that. And also a school nurse, and now a parent of a dyslexic child. So a combination there. So thank you, Margie, for noting that. All right, I'm going to share my screen so you can see the slides. All right, understanding the science of reading, making a difference for students. And Robin, let me know if there's additional comments in the chat while I'm sharing screen. I can't see the chat, but I can go out of it at different points. So challenges, write down some initial thoughts and concerns you have about literacy instruction. So post at least one of these ideas or questions in the chat. You're welcome to even post more than one. So take about a minute or so.
Okay, do you want me to read some of the comments?
Sure. And I'm also going to join on a second device so I can see the chat better. So, but I can't see it yet. So go ahead, share out with us what you see.
Just to respond, I will get the copy of the slides out to everybody when I send an email link with the recording. But okay, first question, where to start? When is it okay to move on?
All right. Great. So where to start? We're going to actually look at that a little bit when we're looking at systematic instruction.
How to follow, or how do we get teachers to follow the science of reading?
That is our big quest. This is us taking part in how to get it more commonplace and common language within our school systems. And I'm also going to share the comprehensive literacy plan that was recently updated, that several of us were a part of that process in and using a science of reading approach. So it becomes familiar to districts, principals, administration, and teachers.
My daughter was diagnosed in middle school. What is even available and age appropriate at that level?
Middle school is a really, really tough time for students with disabilities and students with dyslexia. And at this point in time, there is not much available specifically for students with dyslexia. We want our teachers and our special education teachers to be using evidence-based practice, and the more training and the better the professional development training is, the more likely we're going to have those in our public school systems. There are private institutions and tutors that are specially trained for using explicit and multisensory instructional strategies, educational therapists that can work on very finite areas where your child struggles. Okay, I'm seeing the chat now, so let me just take a look. So it's funny that I see the comment about labeling a child for special education, but the discussion of early identification. So I'll share this specifically because this is what was difficult for my husband and I when our son was struggling. My area is literacy. I was currently in a PhD program, and I have a background in special education for high incident disabilities, so learning disabilities, emotional behavioral disorders. And my husband was particularly concerned with this. And he did not want the school doing the whole battery of assessments for eligibility for special education because he was worried about that very thing. the idea about early intervention is that we provide the intervention prior to special education services. If we're providing really good screening and assessment and intervention services for younger students, there are going to be less students that actually need special education services. So that's the overall goal. However, I also feel like that special education services are necessary for a percentage of students. And we want those services to be appropriate for the students' needs. So that's also an area where I feel like we are lacking, and we really need to be more robust in our special education interventions and instruction. But we got to the point when our son was in 4th grade that there really was not a choice. We had to do something. He was falling behind. His behavior was getting worse in the classroom, and his emotional health and mental health was really suffering. When you're always failing in the classroom, that does a toll to your emotional health. So my thought, especially as a special ed teacher, is when the identification process is really about trying to find out how we can serve that student best. Unfortunately, the system itself doesn't work perfectly, but I'm all about labels if it can help with instruction. All right, we kind of, as you're thinking, as we're going along, keep those chat comments and questions coming, and we'll weave them in, because it's so important, I think, to think about how this really affects what you do every day. So our main goals today is I want our participants, all of you here and those that join and watch the recording later on, to develop a more thorough understanding of the science of reading, and be able to also describe that to someone else, and be able to share that with your colleagues and parents, share that with individuals that are working for your child. Name and describe the key elements of structured literacy and of effective instruction for students with dyslexia and other reading difficulties. And of course, you'll have these slides later, so I've laid those out and provided you also some additional resources that you can look into to have kind of at your fingertips. And then also identify the importance of using validated research to guide selection of curriculum, materials, and instructional approaches to make a difference for students. So particularly for teachers, administrators, and district level individuals, we need to be better evaluating the curriculum we are using in our classrooms. So I'm going to provide you with some tools on how to do that. So those of you in the field are probably familiar with the components of reading. So one of those components is phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. I want to get a sense of how well you understand this concept. So I'm going to share my screen so Robin can share hers again. So this poll is specifically about phonological awareness. Identify the definition. Try to answer as quickly as possible, not think about it too much. Is that Carter? I can't quite see him. Hi, Carter. All right, feel free to share that, Robin, as soon as it looks like 80% or higher. So yay, 62% to recognize and manipulate sounds and words. That is correct. And even better is phonemic awareness is when we are able to manipulate those sounds. The ability to sound out printed words is phonics. So we're using those skills that students have then created, adapted, learned when they can segment those sounds orally, they are better able to use phonics to decode words. All right, great. Thank you, Robin. All right, I'll share my screen again. So back in 1999, early 2000, the National Reading Panel was assembled and gathered research and evidence on what are the most effective pieces of reading. What are those required components that we need to really have effective readers and writers? Because even 20 years ago, we recognized that we were not doing a great job in literacy instruction. So what did the panel discover? They found 5 necessary components. So phonological awareness, a broad term that includes phonemic awareness. So think of phonological awareness as that umbrella. And then the most complex skill under phonological awareness is phonemic awareness. And it's that manipulating those sounds in words. Phonics is when we're then mapping those sounds to print, and students can read and also write. Fluency, the ability to read accurately with also the proper rate and proper expression, not just fast reading, but that they read to comprehend. So they're using periods, commas, other text features to know how to read the text. Vocabulary, word meaning, and ability to use and understand words in context, and morphology, being able to take words apart and understand those individual morphemes and what they do. And then comprehension is really extracting and constructing meaning through text. So we started 20 years ago knowing that these 5 components are really required for solid reading instruction. Since then, we've had additional research, interdisciplinary, of scientifically based research about reading and writing issues. And this is the definition of the science of reading by the Reading League. This is their most recent 2021. And I kind of just pulled out the key phrases that'll help us to understand what the science of reading is. So it's culminated in a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop. So looking at how reading and writing develop, and then why do some children and individuals have difficulty, how we can most effectively assess and then teach. So once we have that knowledge, we can really improve the student outcomes through prevention, so early assessment and intervention, and continued systematic instruction. We'll look at some of the components that have really been fleshed out these last couple of decades, because we have the big 5, we have those big 5 components of essential reading instruction, but there's some additional things that can be integrated under and within some of those big 5 components that make our instruction better. And we're able to have a more thorough approach and better intervention for our students that struggle. So I love Dr. Louisa Moat's article, Reading is Rocket Science. She wrote this also a couple decades ago, but she updated the article in 2020. And I love this quote. "This we know, reading failure can be prevented in all but a small percentage of children with serious learning disorders. It is possible to teach most students how to read if we start early and follow the significant body of research showing which practices are most effective." So it becomes challenging because we know so much, but in the field, we have difficulty implementing what we know into what we do. And there seems to be a disconnect, and curriculums are sold and purchased, and we seem to be married to those curriculums, and they're not necessarily evidence-based. So teacher knowledge is the key. We have to build up teacher knowledge so that our teachers know how to evaluate curriculum, how to evaluate what's missing in that curriculum, because we can prevent a lot of reading difficulties if we can start intervention in those early years. And I'm not saying that there's nothing that can be done with older students, because we can do a lot even with older students. It just generally needs to be more intensive and takes a longer period of time for those students to make progress. Progress happens better and faster when students are young. So that's why we really care so much about early intervention and early assessment. So there is a framework, the simple view of reading, that helps us to think about how all of these pieces fit together. I wanted to look at the comment here too, that I'm going to come back to in just a moment. So the simple view of reading, think about those 5 components and think about how these additional pieces incorporate together to produce strong readers and writers. So if you look at the decoding side, reading equals decoding times language comprehension. So decoding includes knowledge of phonological and phonemic awareness, alphabetic principle. So knowing how those represented sounds are mapped to letters and letter sound correspondence, and then being able to read automatically. So if our students are still decoding at such a slow rate, they're unable to comprehend because all of their cognitive load and thinking is focused on the decoding piece. So it's impossible to comprehend the text. Then we look at the language comprehension piece. So we have background knowledge, vocabulary. We know both of those are big predictors of reading success. Language structure, listening comprehension, verbal knowledge, and literacy knowledge. So I wanted to bring up also a recent report because I've heard others talk about this report, and it caused some kind of a little bit of stir in the field. And there was a report done by it's called an examination of dyslexia research and instruction with policy implications. And the International Association of Educators and Researchers in Literacy, I'm not saying that right, but they basically published this article. And in this article basically says that we're too focused on the science of reading. We're too focused on difficulties like dyslexia, and that the science of reading doesn't take into account writing and comprehension. Well, unfortunately for those authors, they don't quite understand the science of reading because as we see, science of reading incorporates all of these components. It's not just phonics, it is language comprehension. So we are building language knowledge through complex read alouds for young children that aren't decoding challenging text yet. We are building all of those pieces up because that language comprehension piece is critical to be a successful reader and to comprehend text. So knowing that the science of reading includes more than phonics is a critical piece of understanding what the science of reading is and being able to speak to it. So here's a picture of Scarborough's reading rope. If you have been around in intervention world and are familiar with some resources by the International Dyslexia Association, you've probably seen this. It's been around for quite some time. And it shows, I like this image because it really shows how these things are wound together. We cannot just parse out one. But what's so helpful in thinking about reading like this is when we are assessing our students, we can really target where they are lacking. They may have incredible background knowledge and have been read aloud to since the time they were tiny. So strong vocabulary and strong listening comprehension. But students with dyslexia often really struggle in the area of phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. So that decoding piece is not there. So through our screening and assessments, we identify those areas that are lacking and are able to intervene. Oh, sorry, I went too far. Coming back. There we go. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment because I'm going to come to another document that I wanted to show you. And that is the What Works Clearinghouse document. So the What Works Clearinghouse is a an organization that puts together evidence-based practices for teachers. And their practice guides can be very helpful in identifying best practices. So I feel like every teacher needs to be aware of practice guides. And what I often tell my students, my undergraduate pre-service teachers, is that when you're looking at the research, we want to see those practices that are identified across. So many researchers are found, and I'm going to show you that here in a moment. I'm going to pause for a second because I wanted to read this comment in the chat. So labeling is viewed so differently in the world of dyslexia. These kiddos don't appear different, yet they struggle to keep up with what their peers are able to do in the classroom. They're self-conscious about their struggles. They don't understand why they can't do what others can do. So for me and my son and many parents I support, once there's a why behind their struggle, I'm dyslexic, it is empowering. And we've experienced that as well, that it's not because they're not smart and they're not able to do something. It's because they have something different in their brain that makes learning to read more difficult. And by the way, learning to read is complex already. So there's only a few percentage of students that learn to read without instruction. And we've probably met those kids, you know, they come into the classroom and they're reading, you know, third grade, fourth grade texts when they start kindergarten. And my son noticed those kids and he would say, Mom, they're like reading like crazy. And it's small, very small percent, but our kids notice those kids. And he's saying, why can't I do that? I can't do that. And one of these kids was my son's really good friend in kindergarten. And it became very, very difficult to wrap his head around. Why is it so hard for me? I must not be smart. I don't want to be at school. So it can be empowering for students. And I've had special education students that same thing. I've had a conversation with students before. It's not because you can't learn this content, even older students, high school students. It's because you have difficulty with reading tasks. It doesn't mean you can't learn science. It doesn't mean you can't learn history. It means that it's a lot of work for you to learn how to read and write. But those other contents you can do, you can read. It's just that access is difficult. There's a reason I learn differently, and they can explain to their teachers and peers. It's important for our dyslexic children to have the label in order to understand themselves better. I also feel like it's so important in advocacy for themselves. When they're young, that's difficult. But if we are using that language early on, we can teach them how to do that. And oftentimes as a special ed teacher, my high school students, they did not want to talk to their teachers. And I said, this is all about you advocating for yourself on what you need. You can explain to your teachers. I mean, how powerful would that be if a 7th grade student came to their teacher and said, I need systematic and explicit instruction in reading. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to be successful. Pretty powerful. So being able to identify their own needs, I think, is a really important part of the labeling. All right, I'm going to screen share so I can show you this site. So here is the What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide site. I have put the reference in the link in the slide deck. So the What Works Clearinghouse is a place where we can look at instructional and intervention programs and what the evidence is behind them. Now, there are some programs that have been evaluated that show that they have some evidence or minimal evidence, and they're not great programs. What we have to be able to do is look specifically for how those gains were measured. So teachers being really familiar with how to navigate research, I think, is really, really important. But what I wanted to bring your attention to, because these practice guides really aim to put effective practices into reach for teachers. So you'll see mathematics intervention here, foundational skills to support reading, teaching academic content and literacy to English learners, teaching elementary schools to be effective writers. So several different things and topics that you can find there. I've pulled out a few of the major conclusions on some of these reports. And you'll see from Foreman 2016, these were kind of the takeaways from their evaluation of many research studies. So teach students academic language. So notice how that's connected back to the reading rope. We care about language comprehension, awareness of the segments of sounds of speech and how they link to letters. So that alphabetic principle, how to decode words, analyze word parts, recognize words automatically, and read connected text to support reading accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. So another report, major conclusions, how to use reading comprehension strategies, how to identify and use text organizational structure for comprehension, guide students through focused high quality discussion. Again, see how these things are laid out in the reading rope and a structured literacy approach. Select text purposefully to support comprehension, establish an engaging and motivating context in which to teach reading comprehension. So especially with around our middle school age, that motivation piece is critical. And for adolescent readers, explicit vocabulary instruction, direct and explicit comprehension strategy and instruction. So you'll see systematic explicit instruction show up on pretty much every intervention evidence recommendations out there. So if we're hearing explicit instruction all the time, we need to be sure that we are doing that in the classroom. So it's always interesting to me because I see teachers in the classroom pretty frequently, especially undergraduate teachers, and I teach explicit instruction since the moment they meet me, and my students have me for more than one course, so I get to reteach and they practice and they think, yeah, I'm modeling. I am definitely modeling. And then I watch a lesson. Guess what they're not doing? They're not modeling. They're telling, but they're not modeling. So students that have difficulties with reading, students with dyslexia have to see what the expectation is that they are supposed to perform and have lots and lots of practice to actually master that task. And sometimes the other thing that I sometimes see is maybe a teacher's doing the right thing, but they don't teach to mastery. They bail and go to something else before that student has mastered that concept or that practice. So being able to demonstrate mastery prior to moving on. So you'll see intensive individualized instruction, opportunities for extended discussion. I think the slide before I must have skipped over it. So this one is about assessment, that we use assessment to really diagnose what they need to do. So we use that diagnostic information and then tailor that instruction specifically for students that are struggling. Okay, we're going to stop here. I'm going to go to the chat. Go ahead and pop your questions in the chat or examples or comments, or also unmute yourself. I'd love to hear from you. Yep, I have completely heard the same thing. Work harder, work harder. These kids are often the hardest working students that we know. And they're burned out by the time they get to high school because they're not getting solid instruction. And so they're not seeing the results. Yeah, I can back up on that last slide as well. Oops, wrong way. Sorry. It's not letting me go back, so we'll go forward. Just one moment. So this one was the adolescent reader slide. So explicit vocabulary instruction, comprehension strategies, opportunities for extended discussion, motivation and engagement, intensive individualized interventions. Yes, no problem. And I think we're really at this bridge of introducing and talking about dyslexia in our state so teachers can start being comfortable with actually using the terminology. We're barely getting there. As some of you know, integration into language that in materials that the state is produced, that was a big hurdle. Finally, the language is starting to show up, and we're hoping we're like moving along that path and it being a more familiar term to teachers, because I think what has been happening is if we use the term dyslexia, some people in the classroom, some teachers, some administration, whoever it may be, they don't know enough about it. And so it's scary. So they don't want to talk about it because they can't answer questions about it. So that's gratefully one of Decoding Dyslexia Idaho's many, many tasks is getting it out there so teachers, parents, administrators, district personnel, state folks, higher ed institutions are all on the same page of what dyslexia is, what does that mean, what does that mean for student instruction. So we really are trying to close that gap in knowledge base. We're making an improvement, but we still have lots to go. All right, so structured literacy. So I've said this a couple of times on how the evidence since 20 years ago, we now know more about some of those other pieces that need to be a high focus in reading instruction. So phonology, we knew that, we've known that for 20 years, but we're not seeing it taught systematically in a lot of our classrooms or given the time it needs. So in the past, probably 6 months, I've had 2 instances in kindergarten classrooms where the teacher didn't share with me directly, but shared with another individual that they didn't want to spend time on phonological and phonemic awareness activities in instruction because that robs them from instruction, alphabetic awareness instruction. So letter names, letter sounds. And these teachers felt like their big job for the year, make sure every child in their classroom knows their letter name and letter sound. My argument was, that's all fine and good, but if they are lacking in phonological awareness skills and phonemic awareness skills, they are going to have difficulty learning to read. 100%. It's a huge predictor of reading success by grade 3. So if we are not doing that, we're not going to have successful decoders. They might be okay for a little while, especially if they get really good phonics instruction, but there's going to be breakdown somewhere. So I have an intervention and assessment class that we work with one-on-one with students. And this year they're 5th grade students. And we were doing all of the assessments that I train my teachers to do, and then evaluate those assessments and design intervention for those students. Not all of them have dyslexia, not all of them are English language learners, not all of them have learning disabilities. It's kind of a mix, but they're all struggling readers. And
Did we all freeze or just Dr. Brown? Kim, are you with us?
Just Dr. Brown, it's frozen.
It is just
Yeah,
Dr.
I'm with
Brown.
you. She froze.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to pause the recording. Perfect. Oh no.
I mean, but it looks good, but I don't know. So then because of those assessments that we did, we were able to identify her area of struggle, even though she was a good decoder. So a student like that can really hide, they have one area of difficulty and strong other areas of difficulty. And so we have to be very knowledgeable on how we assess and then evaluate the assessments in order to know how we're intervening. All right, I'm going to share my screen again here. because we were on the structured literacy screen.
We had a good question pop up while you were not with us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Teachers work with children with reading disabilities on a daily basis. Is that considered different than working with a child with dyslexia? I just wanted you to speak to that. We
Yes.
chatted about it, but
Yeah, I would love to hear what all of you said too, because it is different. And reading disabilities, the more we can define what is going on, the better our intervention is going to be. So if we've identified that dyslexia is the issue, then we're better to tailor instruction in ways that have been demonstrated to be effective for students with dyslexia. Even though it's the most common, it's unfortunately there's practices across the board that need to be in place for all students, and especially students for struggling readers. And then there's additional practices that slightly differ depending on the need of the child or the type of disability area. What were some of your all thoughts as you were discussing that?
I was just mentioning, if you teach to a dyslexic, you'll basically hit most of your other children that have struggling readers.
Right.
You know, my weird one was I had a student who could only see 3D. She did not see 2D. And so all of the reading instruction intervention she was getting up till when I met her as a junior in high school wasn't helpful, because they weren't addressing her issue, which was seeing 3D on a 2D paper. And yeah, it was unique.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And I think that the struggling readers, you know, there's such a diversity in the depth of struggle. And my son is severely dyslexic. So, you know, working with a struggling reader every day versus working with a kiddo like my son, you need that much more repetition and explicit instruction that our educators just really don't have time for. You guys have so much on your plate. So that's where it's so important for a kiddo like mine to qualify for an IEP and to get that real small group, even better, one-on-one explicit instruction.
Right. And if we think about, so that tiered instructional approach. So in general education classrooms, they should be getting good, solid reading instruction across the board. If they have not had that, perhaps they don't have dyslexia, they don't have a reading disability, they just never have been taught explicitly, systematically, so they were unable to figure out the code. But let's say they had the good instruction, they kind of move to that tier 2, so small group. So when students aren't responding to instruction, we should be getting more intense. How do we intensify? We intensify by smaller group, additional time, more practice to mastery level. So if you look at kind of those areas and you think, okay, what can I do to intensify the instruction for this student because they're not making progress? We don't know that unless we're doing assessments, informative assessments on a regular basis to know if, okay, are they making progress? So that intensity is kind of the key, I think, when we're not seeing progress. However, if we're attacking, to Kim's point, if we're attacking the wrong problem, we're not going to see much progress if it's not even addressing the main original problem. So another, I guess, point of importance about assessment, like we really have to know how to use assessment and how to read standardized assessments, and the assessments our students are administered when they qualify for special education services, et cetera. We need to be able to interpret and read those reports as well. So if you look at all of these pieces, I've kind of hit on several of them just in our discussion. So the phonology, sound symbol association, syllables, syllable types. Many teachers don't understand the difference and what syllable types are. Knowing syllable types, knowing syllable division helps our students know how to decode multisyllabic words, to learn the rules and patterns of the English language and be able to apply them to words they don't know, and specifically teaches them then how to represent those spelling patterns in print. So that's why sometimes we see the problems come out in student spelling, because they don't know those patterns. They don't know how to then transfer them to new words. Morphology, looking at those word parts, which really go hand in hand with the syllable division piece. Syntax, learning the sequence, the function of words, the grammar. Semantics, that meaning piece. And across the board, everything systematic and cumulative. So steps are based on mastered skills. So we don't move along until they have demonstrated mastery. Again, explicit also is overarching in all of these components noted. And then diagnostic, that's the assessment piece, is how do we direct instruction based on what they need. So I love this on the International Dyslexia Association site. It's an article by Spear Swelling, 2019, so pretty new article. This is a great way to look at some of your practices as teachers, or even look at your programs that you're using or have been asked to use in your classrooms, comparing structured literacy to typical practice. So if you look at the typical practice column, you'll see larger unit approach, word families, the structured literacy, when we're looking at phonics instruction, phoneme graphing level approach. So learning how individual sounds, individual graphemes are represented and how those are blended together to make words. So attention to phonemic awareness, and also systematic in how that phonemic awareness is introduced and practiced versus a haphazard approach. So phonemic awareness may be included, but not systematic, not in a way that students are practicing it well enough to obtain mastery. Decoding and spelling instruction, well-coordinated. Beginners work on similar word patterns in decoding and spelling. So they're learning to read it and they're learning to write it, compared to memorizing whole words. You'll see delivery, explicit, systematic, compared to maybe teacher-led, but not explicit. Types of text, decodable text versus level text. I was really showing this to some of my pre-service teachers just in the last week, as some of them were in classrooms, and I said, well, look to see if you can find decodable text in the classroom. Some basic decodable text, because they were in a little bit older grade level, but we were looking for some decodable text for struggling readers in those beginning CVC kind of stages. And sure enough, she brought me level text. So for pre-service teachers and teachers to understand the difference between those and how decodable texts are really essential in students mastering that ability to read these patterns they're learning. Then of course, teacher feedback on oral reading. So you're really paying attention to what students are doing and providing feedback and corrective feedback, so you can reteach the areas that they're struggling. I'm gonna pop over to the chat. Oh, yeah, that always makes me sad to hear, because I feel like it's always hard to get a hold of decodable text. So there are definitely some programs out there that are more acceptable than others. And we're hoping in our state to get to a point that we can provide a suggested list of curriculums that are appropriate to use and have these features of structured literacy. One that we're somewhat familiar with, that I have not used, but I'm somewhat familiar with, is ECRI, which is basically an overlay. Robin, correct me if I'm wrong, overlay to Journeys, correct? Like it adds in additional instructional components to the Journeys curriculum.
Yes, it's the Enhanced Core Reading Indicator, ECRI, that came out of the University of Oregon. It's an overlay to poorly written curriculum such as Journeys and Wonders, that just takes a teacher, literally, my understanding is literally overlays in their curriculum book, taking the teacher into a deeper dive of those pieces that you've talked about, Sally. And It has been used here in Idaho some. It was kind of a pilot program in some smaller districts, but it's very well respected by Dr. Moats and others that would know whether it was good or not. The biggest piece, like everything, is to get professional development in place for teachers to really understand how to use that overlay. So there is professional development available when you purchase ECRI, whether a district's able to do that or not.
Right. And it seems like I've heard of some districts in northern Idaho that are using it, probably because their closeness with the Oregon border and stuff that I think crossover between districts in that area. So it's something that as a state we're pushing for, because we know there are so many smaller districts that don't have the ability to evaluate curriculums and need some guidance. That districts would still have those options, but that they would have something to choose from to provide teachers better materials. We want our teachers to know. We want our teachers to be able to identify when the programs aren't meeting a systematic approach and where there are holes. And so back to that decoding comment, get the word out. Decodable texts are critical for students learning to read. And I know that often we hear back, but they're so boring. Students aren't engaged. Well, it's not the only kind of text they're getting exposed to. They're good at getting wonderful read alouds. They're getting complex, audible opportunities to listen to really complex storylines. So you're teaching comprehension and vocabulary using more complex text, but they're learning to read using decodable text, and that's systematic. So when they approach that text, they know the patterns that are introduced in that text. So yeah, even this past year, because of COVID, there have been some companies that have made some text available free of charge, decodable online text. So a lot of my pre-service teachers that were doing online intervention with students, we were using some of those programs that were making decodable text online free of charge for the year. And a couple of the companies still have those available, which is always exciting to me. Thank you for the commentary in the chat, answering each other's questions. Some good opportunities to find where we can find these materials. So this, I also like to show this. I know I'm showing a lot of frameworks, but I want to really show you how these pieces fit together and why each piece is so important. So this table is from the Barksdale Reading Institute, Reading Universe, and readinguniverse.org is the website. You have to sign up for an account, but it's free and it has some good materials there. But it even has instructional practices and examples and lots of things available on their site. So you'll see the big five, and then how they're kind of parsed out even more so systematically. So under phonological awareness, you see the syllable level, onset and rhyme, articulation of sounds, phonemic awareness as the most difficult skill in manipulating those sounds. So another resource where you can go and look at even mini lessons and examples and models of phonics lessons that are incorporating teaching students learning how to read and write at the same time with lots of practice. All right, so the Idaho Comprehensive Literacy Plan, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this is another document that we really want educators to be familiar with. This we feel like is a good start to some of the work that we're doing. And you'll see it has basically 5 parts laid out, and I'll even come to the document so you can see what it looks like. You can do a search, Idaho Comprehensive Literacy Plan, it comes up, there's a PDF version, and starts with an introduction of where we are, where we're going, a section on developing literacy that actually introduces the science of reading and what that means and how language develops and how that's connected to literacy in a basic way. And then essential elements section really points out all of the stakeholders that need to be involved in really improving reading for all students and being able to target instruction for students that have signs of and characteristics of dyslexia early, pre-K, kinder, first grade, and that we can maybe get some more effective instruction for those students early on, so they don't need special education services because they've had that really good instruction. And then student performance data and a call to action. So kind of next steps, what we need to do. So I would recommend sharing this with your colleagues and your administrators as a place to begin, And we know that it is goals. These are the goals we're working towards to work together. And there are things that every stakeholder needs to do to make things happen. And so next steps are many, as you'll see in the goals outlined there. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and share something else because I wanted to share the document, what it looks like so you can see it. So just give me one moment. All right, so comprehensive literacy plan, kindergarten through 12th grade, and you'll see the outline here and even a little bit of movement on what it looks like to use assessment and data and effective instruction and what we need to include in how we're developing professional educators. So hopefully you'll take some time and look at that and share with your colleagues. All right, coming back to my other screen. So selecting materials. So I wanted to show you this because it can be very helpful in evaluating what you have available as teachers right now. So this is a curriculum evaluation tool by the Reading League, and I've put the full link in on the reference page. It helps guide you in each one of these areas to evaluate your reading curriculum so you can see where the holes are. So I'm going to click out again because I think I want to share what this tool looks like. I have it pulled up. So here it is, and this is free. If you do a search for the Reading League curriculum evaluation tool, it'll pop up one of the first things, and it's so helpful in identifying what are those components in our curriculums that we need to see, and what are kind of red flags of this is not cutting it. So you'll look at word recognition here. So phonological and phoneme awareness. Instruction includes the larger units of phonological awareness as well as the phoneme level. So you can identify, is it systematic? Is it starting at the syllable and word level, rhyme, onset and rhyme, and then down to those individual sounds in phonemes? Or does it focus on rhyme, but never actually moves to the phoneme level? We know that phoneme level, being able to discriminate between those sounds, is the best predictor of reading success under that phonological component. So if it's missing this part, it's not going to be effective instruction for young kiddos. Letter sound correspondence are taught in explicit, systematic, and sequential fashion from simple to complex. Red flag, or it's just taught as it's coming up in the curriculum. Oh, this pattern is now in the words that they have to read in the passage, so I'm going to teach it. Not systematic. Their students will have big holes in their learning. They may effectively learn that pattern, but they haven't learned everything they really needed to learn before that. And for students with dyslexia, this is just a hot mess because there's no system in how they're making sense of reading. So take some time and look at this. It's really, really helpful. in evaluating what you have, and it helps identify where the holes are. So then as you're speaking about curriculum and that you need additional materials and different kinds of materials to more systematically teach early reading skills, you can speak to some of these exact things. I'm going to pop over to the chat for a quick moment before I go back. Thank you for adding that link, Robin. Yes, thoughts on teaching sight words. So I just want to clarify the term sight words versus high frequency words. We use the word sight because we want students to recognize them on sight. To become a good reader, we have to recognize all words on sight, right? And we are able to do that because at one point we learn how to decode, and it becomes automatic to us. So there's a strategy called a heart word strategy. And if you even do that search, it'll pull up lots of resources, and some of the websites that I've mentioned. Barksdale Reading Institute has some resources available for teaching heart words. To teach heart words, first you have to think about, so I want these students to learn these high frequency words on sight. I want them to be able to read them automatically. How do I do that? So sometimes we have taught them in the past as they're memorizing that whole word. Kids with dyslexia, that's very, very difficult, but because they're learning to decode, there's a system in place. And now they have to memorize this whole word. If students have been taught to memorize those words and fifth grade, they still can't do it, they're not going to do it. They're showing that, hey, I couldn't memorize their short-term memory. It never moved over into long-term memory. They can't recognize those words. So the heart word strategy is emphasizing what can I decode in that word. So many of our high frequency words have parts of words that are irregular, always irregular. They never, even once students know how to decode all the patterns, those words are still irregular, like the word was. A does not say a, S does not say s, it says z, but the W actually is decoded. We can use that. That represents a sound the students know. So then we teach them that W, we're using our decoding skills, and the A and the S, we put a heart above or a heart around, and those parts of the word is what we're going to memorize. So the ability to decode some of the word and identify what part of the word we have to know by heart. That's why it's called the heart word strategy. It can be very, very effective. And there are some irregular words that have patterns like other irregular words. So students knowing that can help them transition. Thank you for connecting that link. Excellent. I love it when we can all share what we know and have learned. All right, we'll pop back over to the slides. So explicit instruction is something that teachers are very familiar with, parents may be somewhat familiar with, but I always like to bring ourselves back to thinking about it because sometimes we think we're doing it and we might not be doing it as well as we thought. So make sure that our teaching is matching the student's level, and that's based on assessment. What do we know from the assessments we've administered to them? How can we align our teaching? We're determining their baseline knowledge, their background knowledge, and building upon that. Align instruction with the standards and with the assessment. So if we look at the International Dyslexia Association, the knowledge and practice standards, which are mentioned in the Comprehensive Literacy Guide, Idaho's. So that's something I want reading teachers to be really familiar with, is those knowledge and practice standards, because it lays out the knowledge that teachers should know about reading and how that your instruction is aligning with what students need and what teachers need to know. And then of course, our core standards we're used to as teachers, aligning our instruction with that. Then determine our scope and sequence. Such an important piece. That sequence, if that sequence is off, our students are going to have difficulty. We gain attention, we state the objectives for what we're going to learn, And I always think it's funny when I have teachers, well, I don't want to state the objectives because it kind of ruins the surprise. Well, we want our students to know where they're going to end up. I was telling a teacher this week or last week, when students come into your class, this is a middle school teacher, and a very diverse group of students, lots of students with reading difficulties. I don't know if there's some in this class that I was watching in particularly diagnosed with dyslexia, but big, broad range of student abilities in this class. When they're coming into your class, they should be leaving with a higher level of skill. So what we're doing is not busy work. Everything that we're doing has a purpose to elevate that student to a higher level of mastery, proficiency, whatever it may be. So objective, relevance to the skill. Did we get there? Did the student master that? Do they need more practice? We always review those prerequisite skills. We always model the new skill. We provide lots of practice so we can give corrective feedback as needed and opportunity to practice it on their own. And if they aren't to mastery, then we reteach. I also think of the modeling, I do, we do, you do, as more circular than linear, because as we model and they practice, we see where we need to reteach and provide more practice as we go back to the modeling. It's not just a linear model that we chunk through and then done. We're always circling back to for students to have more practice. So I wanted to show you an example. I think we're about 10 after, 12 after. So a few examples of what it would look like for a systematic phonemic awareness approach. Now, these are still broad categories, but you can see, and in your evaluation of curriculum, you can see how this would play out in the most simple task to the most complex. So the first one, this is directly from University of Oregon as well. Standard word discrimination, which word does not belong, and what word rhymes with cat. So first they recognize rhyme orally, not written, because that's a different skill. That's a phonics skill. So we're saying these words, or showing them pictures of these words. They're saying them, they're identifying which one is the odd man out, or they're generating a rhyme, which is a little more difficult than discrimination. Onset and rhyme splitting, so and at, identifying that initial sound, blending of sound. So we give students at, what's the word, cat, that they can blend that orally. And then we start working on phoneme segmentation. Can you separate out each sound in that word? And there's levels within that too. So in words that don't have blends and digraphs, and then we get to more complex words and identifying those sounds. And that can be tricky for some of those complex multisyllabic words. Then being able to delete the phoneme and also manipulate the phoneme. So if you have the word cat and we say change the t to n and becomes can. And the skill that it takes to do that is somewhat complex. So you see how students would need to master these other skills before they can manipulate phonemes. Here's an example of a sequence for introducing letters. So alphabetic principles. So this is from Carnine Silbert, 1997. There are several researchers that have produced a sequence for introducing letters and also phonics skills. There's some variation. I definitely am a believer in introducing so in kinder, most students are familiar with the alphabet. They can name the letter names, but maybe not the sounds, but introducing the most frequent consonants with a frequent vowel and blending words right from the get-go of instruction. They start learning to decode and read words with 4 to 5 consonants and 1 vowel. If we wait all the way down until we've introduced all the alphabet letters to start putting that together, we've kind of robbed students of that practice. They need that practice of blending those sounds to figure out the code. All right, I'm going to stop sharing because I wanted to give us time to discuss and chat. and look at the questions or comments. So I have a student who struggles to identify the first and ending sounds of words, even in BC words. Rhyming is extremely difficult. Suggestions. So I would even step back and work specifically on word differentiation, like on rhyming. So if I give students pictures of words and they all rhyme except for one, can the student do that? Also segmenting words in sentences. Can the student, if you say a sentence and you have blocks in front of you, I like pizza, I like pizza, is the student able to identify different words? So I think of that first, and then go to identifying differences in words and practice rhyming skills before that initial sound and end sound. Other thoughts on that one? Other teachers that have had success with that? Feel free to unmute too.
Yeah, I have my students in the beginning work with just the pictures like Sally was talking about. Pictures of just, like a whole 12 pictures and 2 of them rhyme. So, you've got 6 pairs of rhymes and it's all through pictures, no words written out until they can get it, because it has to be auditory before they can do it from the visual letter combination. And then sometimes the kids will know the sound but can't tell you the name of the letter. It's just something you got to keep working on.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. So, and definitely my suggestion is stay with those tasks until they have mastered that task. Sometimes we might think, oh, maybe I just should move along. We want to do it till mastery. We know students with dyslexia need a lot of phonological instruction and instruction in phonemic awareness. So we don't want to bail on the activity. We might approach it a slightly different way, but we're still working on the same task. I teach pre-K. Even as we are walking to different places, I rhyme with them, even if it doesn't make sense. Yeah, that play with language. The more we can use language to play, and they're hearing that all of the time, they're getting some of that to just have practice doing the skill, practice recognizing.
Ooh.
How do I know what mastery is? Great question. I love that question. So I ask my pre-service teachers this all the time. So you identify exactly what you want to see from the task when you're fleshing out a lesson plan. What is my evidence? So if I'm providing students 10 opportunities to identify a pair of rhyming words, and they are getting 8 out of 10, I would say that's pretty close to mastery. 8 out of 10 times, they're pretty close to mastery, but I don't want to leave it until they're 10-10 mastery. So it's really important to identify what that threshold is. Really important, and that somebody else could recognize it. If you wrote something on your lesson plan, I am going to have students complete this task 10 times, and we're going to make sure it is 10 out of 10 correct before we move along, then know what that is. Sometimes I might say 7 out of 10 because I'm also working on another skill that maybe benefit the student in the first practice activity that we did. And I'm still keeping up with it from lesson to lesson until I see that mastery. If we're thinking about, and I think that can relate to really any of those components that we are talking about. So if they have not demonstrated 10 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, then that also clues me in, do I need to do something differently in instruction to help them understand that concept? So in the example up above, oh, we need to back up a little bit because they're unable to do this task that I'm asking them to do. Yeah, sure, no problem. Other questions you have, or comments, or things that you're curious about, or maybe something we haven't addressed that you'd like to discuss?
I have
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
question. I don't want to type it, so I'm just going to ask you.
Perfect.
Do you or anyone on here ever do you ever see, like, maybe it's a memory thing? I have a kiddo I've been working with for quite a while, and we're trying to she's not diagnosed or anything, but we're trying to put our finger on what is it? Is it dyslexia? Is it it almost feels like we can't get things into her short-term memory. Even, I mean, there's things in her long-term memory, so we know it works. Something is going on there. Is that ever shown or felt like with dyslexia?
Yeah, does somebody want to address that first before me?
I can tell you that, as I said earlier, my son is on the severe end of the spectrum, and his long-term auditory processing ability is off the charts at much higher scale, but his working memory piece is so delayed that it's really difficult for him to take in what a teacher is giving him and hang on to it. And then the teacher adds to that lesson, and then he's expected to piece those together. I mean, it's just an impossible skill. I can't speak to why, or I'm sure Dr. Brown or Dr. Zadel could speak better, but I will tell you that it's, from where I sit as a mom of a son that's severely dyslexic and as an advocate supporting families across the state, it's very common in dyslexia to have poor working memory.
Yeah, completely agree. So if you're a parent that has had a child that had the battery of assessments for either eligibility, or you were looking for a diagnosis, and so you were working with a pediatrician or a psychologist, psychiatrist, you will see if a child is showing characteristics of dyslexia. Many, just as Robin said, have a low working memory. My son as well has a low working memory, and his long-term memory, the same as what Robin just shared, really good. And his memory about complex storylines that even were just read. So it's not that he has to, it's different than learning a reading and writing skill, because you're holding that in your working memory and then you have to do something with it. Versus I'm not sure why, but when it's connected to story or it's connected to experience, somehow they're able to transfer it to their long-term memory and have this complex discussion about it. And you're thinking, oh my word, I have no idea. I don't remember any of that. So it's super interesting. And it looks like somebody else in the chat said low working memory and ADD. She struggles a lot with school. Now in 8th grade is making great progress. Great news. That's always happy to hear. But yes, that can be a real challenge, and even more important for the mastery piece. So we think we've retaught and retaught and retaught and retaught, and they're still not getting it. Have we tried multisensory approaches? Are we sure we're teaching the right skill? Do we need to back up? Those are some of the questions I sometimes ask myself if I'm not getting I'm not getting movement. Also, the intensity, like I mentioned before. Can I go a smaller group? Can I go more time? Can I go every day instead of 3 days a week? Some of those pieces, if I can now move it to every day, perhaps that'll help shift it into I now can perform the task for the student.
And I think too that working memory piece, and when you see their ability, like Dr. Brown said, to be able to articulate, and my son does the same, where he just can really share back details of maybe a documentary that he watched, say, for example, on the History Channel or something. And he will literally you just think, oh, this boy is so intelligent. And I feel like that's a reason why in our classrooms, kids like my son are so often misunderstood. They do appear to have such strengths. And so it's obvious why a teacher might say, well, you just need to try harder. I know that you're smart. I know that you look at all this that you're able to do. And so there's just a real misunderstanding of what dyslexia is, because that working memory piece and trying to hold on those smaller tasks in the classroom and piece them all together is really just so difficult. And it's confusing as to why, knowing that they're so strong in this other way. I can't explain it, but it's a very common trait for dyslexic students. And also I feel like it's a real reason why they're so misunderstood.
And I think that plays into also the executive functioning, like the organization. And so that piece is a mess. So the teachers are looking at this mess going, well, of course you can't find anything, but they have to be explicitly taught how to organize themselves, where do I go to find this material? How do I review? And if we're not addressing some of those pieces, then it's really hard to then implement something new that they're learning, because it's hard to keep track of everything going on. And Connie has a lot of information, and in her presentation, the keynote, she talks a little bit about that executive functioning piece too.
And there are working memory remediation things that you can do to remediate the working memory. My son's made some progress with those. They're not traditionally done in the classroom setting, but dictation and copy was a big one for him. The teacher reads a sentence, a short sentence, Carter reads it back, and then he copies it on paper. And those 3 steps are hard for kids like ours. You've heard the sentence, now you've got to say the sentence, now you've got to write the sentence. Well, inevitably he ends up not saying all the words or not writing all the words. But over time, that dictation and copy remediation tactic has helped him to grow and be able to hold on to all those pieces. There are ways. Working memory goals. I've included working memory goals on his IEP, for example.
Yeah, great example.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah. For my students who struggle with memory, I try to incorporate other senses like movement and make a connection to something they are interested in and know a lot about. Insects, for example. Yeah, that multisensory piece and connecting to background knowledge can be really, really helpful. Oh, excellent. Robin has a lot of information. You start asking questions and
yeah, the working memory goals was new to me too, because it is such a deficit for my son. I just was frantically looking for ways to write appropriate goals on his IEP, because we kept focusing on fluency and we kept focusing on these bigger things, but the struggle was deeper than that. And so there are some good working memory goals, and maybe I'll include some in the drive that I'm dumping all the shared files in. So when I send out the recording, decoding goals and working memory goals are so much more important for our kids than fluency and comprehension. Verbally comprehension, our kids are usually have a strength in that. But that seems to be and I think that the school system has like a platform when the teacher goes to write an IEP where they drag and drop goals. I don't love that. So I'll do my best to share some goals that I've found. The dictation and copy one is one that I put on my sons, and most teachers aren't familiar with it. It's a educational therapy approach through NILD educational therapists, but my teachers have used it. It's easy to use and it's really effective.
Excellent.
Yeah, a little bit more on the dictation and copy. The teacher will read the sentence, then the student reads or says the sentence back, and then the student has to write it from memory. So like if the paragraph has 4 sentences, you dictate 2 of them and then they have to correct. And then the last 2 they copy as homework. So that's why it's called dictation and copy. So the dictation part's from memory.
Yeah, great point. Excellent. Well, I did leave my email on the slide, so you are welcome to email me if you have other thoughts. And Robin's putting together the drive with all of the materials in. So hopefully you can stay connected and keep learning. So thanks for being here. I know it's a hard time on a weeknight with kids and dinner and been teaching all day or working all day. So thank you. for
Thank
being
you,
here.
Dr. Brown. I always love to learn and grow with you. I love the science of reading, and I appreciate that you shared the comprehensive literacy plan. You worked so hard on that, and it turned out so well. So I did download that in the shared drive as well to be sure that
Perfect.
everybody, gets a copy of that.
Perfect. Thank
so
you so much. Robin.
Thank you for being here. Don't forget next week, we've got another webinar. It's Karen Kilpatrick Snell. She's an Orton Gillingham based instructor, dyslexic specialist. She'll be teaching what we need to teach and when to teach it. So we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Everyone
you
have a
all.
great night.